Today's deep dive is brought to you by Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate covering Northern Nevada. We really appreciate Skip bringing these deep dives to our community. So, have you heard about intergenerational communities?
I have.
Yeah. It's this really cool housing model that's gaining traction, and we're going to unpack why that is and how it actually works, using this report called Healthier Lives Across Generations, a blueprint for intergenerational living.
Yeah, it's interesting because when people first hear that term, they sometimes picture like a nursing home attached to a kindergarten.
Yeah.
But it's so much more nuanced and interesting than that. It's really about intentionally designing communities where people of all ages can live together and support each other in ways that benefit everyone.
Okay, so let's dive into some specifics from this report. One of the biggest things it highlights is how intergenerational living can address social isolation, particularly for older adults. And I was actually surprised by how much research backs this up.
Yeah, well, you know what's fascinating is that we often think about social connection as this nice-to-have thing, but studies show it's actually crucial for both physical and mental well-being, especially as we age.
Right. And that's where this model gets really interesting. Instead of older adults being kind of siloed off in senior communities, they're integrated into a more diverse environment. The report actually gives some great examples of this in action. Like, have you heard of Bridge Meadows?
Bridge Meadows, yes, that's a fantastic example of how this can work. They provide housing for families who are adopting or fostering children, and they intentionally integrate older adults into the community.
So it's like built-in grandparent figures
Yeah,
who can offer mentorship and support.
that's amazing.
And the report mentions another community called the Treehouse Foundation, which does something similar.
Yeah, it's incredible to see the impact these communities have. Not only are older adults benefiting from the social interaction, but they're also providing invaluable support to these families, which can make a huge difference in the lives of the kids.
Okay, so we've got the benefits for older adults, the benefits for families. But the report also talks about this idea of shared resources and skills. I have to admit, when I first read that, I pictured like a retired mechanic teaching teens how to fix cars.
That's not far off. It's about recognizing that each generation has something unique to offer. And by creating opportunities for sharing those skills and resources, you create a more resilient and vibrant community. It could be anything from gardening and cooking to tech support, or even just helping with childcare.
And, I mean, let's be real in today's economy. Sharing resources can also be a huge help with affordability. I know the report specifically calls out how intergenerational communities can help with housing costs,
Yeah.
which are a major burden for so many people right now.
Yeah, that's such a critical point. Intergenerational communities can offer more affordable housing options, especially for younger generations struggling to enter the market and older adults on fixed incomes. This model can help create more diverse and inclusive communities, not just in terms of age, but also in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds.
This all sounds pretty amazing, but I'm sure you know, can't be all sunshine and roses. What are some of the challenges that the report highlights?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is financing. Putting together funding for these projects can be really complex. You've got to navigate a patchwork of different subsidies and tax credits, and that can be a major headache for developers.
Yeah, I can imagine that trying to piece together funding from federal, state, and even local sources can be a nightmare.
It's a real challenge. And then you've got zoning regulations. Many cities are simply not set up for this type of innovative housing, which can make getting approval a real battle.
So it's not just about having a great idea. It's about navigating a whole bureaucratic maze to actually make it happen. That's got to be frustrating for developers who are trying to do something good.
It definitely is. And even once a community is built, there's the ongoing work of maintaining that balance and addressing the evolving needs of a diverse resident base. You've got to create systems and structures that ensure everyone feels heard and respected.
So it's about more than just building the physical space. It's about cultivating a sense of community that can thrive over time.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of intentional effort and planning.
Well, luckily, this report isn't just about pointing out the problems. It actually offers solutions. They have this whole section called the Blueprint, which lays out strategies for overcoming these barriers and scaling up intergenerational living. And some of it is pretty inspiring stuff.
Yeah, one of the key things they emphasize is the need for a stronger evidence base. We need more research that shows the concrete benefits of this model, especially the long-term health and well-being outcomes for older adults.
So basically, if we can prove that this model actually improves people's lives, it'll be easier to get buy-in from investors and policymakers.
Exactly. Data is powerful. It can help convince those who might be hesitant about something so new.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But it's not just about convincing the bigwigs, right? The report also talks about the importance of raising public awareness.
Absolutely. We need to get the word out and show people what intergenerational living actually looks like in practice. Many people haven't even heard of this concept. So it's about changing perceptions and showing that this is a viable, even desirable way to live.
So it's about educating both the people who might live in these communities and the people who make decisions about housing policy.
Exactly. It's a multi-pronged approach.
Well, speaking of policy, the report has a whole section on financing and regulatory changes. I'm guessing this is where things get really complicated.
It can be. They talk about the need to align housing and service subsidies, which often operate in silos. It's about making it easier for developers to access the funding they need to make these projects financially feasible.
And then there's a whole zoning issue. The report argues that many current zoning codes are just not designed for this type of innovative housing.
You're right. They recommend updating zoning regulations to allow for more flexibility and creativity in housing development.
So basically, if we want to see more intergenerational communities, we need to create a regulatory environment that supports them.
Exactly. It's about clearing the path for this model to flourish.
And the final piece of this blueprint is all about knowledge sharing. They talk about the importance of existing communities sharing their experiences, both the successes and the challenges, which I think is such a smart approach.
It is. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. By creating a network of support and knowledge sharing, we can accelerate the growth of these communities and learn from each other's experiences.
So it's about creating a movement, a collaborative effort to make intergenerational living a reality.
Exactly. And it's something that we can all be a part of.
Well, on that note, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll dive into some real-world examples of intergenerational communities that are already thriving.
Sounds good. You know, one thing that stood out to me in the report was how they highlighted Germany as a model for intergenerational living.
Oh, yeah. They've actually been doing this for decades, right? They have these things called Mehrgenerationenhäuser,
Yeah.
which I guess basically translates to multi-generational houses.
Exactly. And they've seen some really impressive outcomes, like improved social cohesion, reduced healthcare costs, and just an overall increase in well-being for residents.
So it's not just a theory. It's something that's been proven to work in the real world. That's really encouraging.
Yeah. It definitely gives us a roadmap for how to implement similar models in other countries. Of course, we need to be mindful of cultural differences and adapt the approach accordingly. But it's inspiring to see that it's possible to create these kinds of thriving intergenerational communities.
Okay, so we've talked about the benefits,
Yeah.
the challenges, the solutions, and even some international examples. But let's bring it back to the listener for a moment. Why should someone listening to this care about intergenerational communities? What's the takeaway for them?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways is that this model offers a real alternative to the often limited and isolating housing options we have now, especially as our society continues to age.
And it's not just about finding a place to live. It's about creating connections, building stronger communities, and fostering a sense of belonging that can benefit everyone involved.
Imagine a future where these kinds of communities are the norm, not the exception, where kids grow up with older adults as mentors and role models, where neighbors help each other out, and where everyone feels like they have a place and a purpose.
It's a pretty powerful vision. And it's exciting to think that we're already starting to see it come to life in places. I know the report mentions a community called One Flushing in Queens, New York. That's been really successful.
Yes. One Flushing is a great example of how this model can be adapted to an urban environment. They've created this vibrant mixed-use development that includes housing for seniors, families, and young adults, along with community spaces, gardens, and even a senior center.
So it's not just about putting people of different ages in the same building. It's about creating a thoughtfully designed environment that encourages interaction and supports a sense of community.
Exactly. And that's where the blueprint comes in. It's about using those strategies to create communities that are truly intergenerational, not just in terms of who lives there, but in terms of how they interact and support each other.
Okay, but I want to be realistic here. I'm sure some people listening might be a little skeptical. They might be thinking, this sounds great in theory, but what about in practice? What about noise from kids, or clashing lifestyles, or just feeling like your privacy is being invaded?
Those are all valid concerns. And that's why the report emphasizes the importance of intentional design and community building. It's about creating spaces that accommodate different needs and lifestyles, and about fostering a culture of respect and understanding across generations.
So it's not about forcing people to interact. but about creating opportunities for those meaningful connections to happen organically.
Precisely. And remember, the report also highlights the importance of resident involvement in the planning process. This isn't a top-down approach where someone dictates how the community should function. It's about residents having a say in shaping the kind of community they want to live in.
That makes a lot of sense. So ultimately, it's about creating a community that works for everyone. And that's not always easy, but it sounds like it's definitely worth striving for.
Absolutely. And you know what's so exciting about this is that it's not just a housing solution, it's a societal solution. It's about reimagining how we live together, how we support each other across generations, and how we create a more connected and fulfilling way of life.
I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from me to we. And that's a pretty powerful message.
It is, and it's a message that's resonating with more and more people. We're seeing a growing movement of folks who are hungry for this kind of connection and community, and that's incredibly encouraging.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into intergenerational communities, what's the one thing you want listeners to walk away with?
I want them to walk away with a sense of possibility. This isn't just a utopian dream. It's something that's happening now, and it's something that we can all be a part of. Whether it's exploring this housing option for ourselves or our loved ones, advocating for policy changes, or just starting a conversation about the importance of intergenerational connection, every action makes a difference.
Beautifully said. And a big thanks again to Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate for making this deep dive possible. We appreciate your support. It's really inspiring to think about the potential here.
It is, and I think what's so compelling about this model is that it's not just a win for older adults or families with young children, it's a win for everyone involved.
Right, it's like this ripple effect of positive change spreading outwards from these communities.
Exactly, and the report actually touches on this, talking about how intergenerational communities can be particularly beneficial in rural areas where resources are often scarce and social isolation can be even more pronounced.
Oh, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about that, but it makes perfect sense. Having a central hub where people of all ages can connect, access services, and support each other could be a game changer for these communities.
Imagine a rural town with a thriving intergenerational community center.
Yeah, offering everything from childcare and after-school programs to senior services and social events, skills workshops, and even shared gardens.
It could revitalize the entire community, fostering a sense of belonging and shared purpose.
But let's get real for a minute. I know there are probably some folks out there who are still a bit hesitant about this whole idea.
Oh, absolutely. And some of that hesitation is understandable. People might worry about things like noise from kids, or clashing lifestyles, or just feeling like their personal space is being invaded.
Right. Those are legitimate concerns. But the report emphasizes that a lot of those potential issues can be addressed through thoughtful design and intentional community building.
Exactly. It's about creating spaces that cater to different needs and preferences, and about fostering a culture of mutual respect and understanding.
So it's not about forcing everyone into some kind of homogenous blob, but about finding ways to celebrate and embrace those generational differences.
Precisely. And remember, the report also stresses the importance of resident involvement in the planning process. So it's not like someone comes in and dictates how the community should function. Residents have a say in shaping the kind of community they want to live in.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into intergenerational communities, I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
What would it look like to bring this vision to life in your own community?
What small step could you take today to learn more, to start a conversation, or to even advocate for change?
Because even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect, creating a wave of positive change that extends far beyond ourselves.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. And a big thanks again to Skip Benton with Coldwell Banker Select Real Estate for making this deep dive possible. We appreciate your support.